And we are live.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our disciplinary matrix input session. This is a virtual event to get public feedback on our draft disciplinary matrix report. The PAB policy team will present the details of the report, and you'll be able to ask questions, provide comments, and you can do all of that in the chat. All of the questions about the matrix will be cataloged. Some of the questions about the matrix will be addressed in real time or as time allows. If you have any additional comments or any feedback or questions about the PAB that do not involve the draft disciplinary matrix, you can forward them to pabfeedback@cityofrochester.gov. Right now, I'll hand it over to Jonathan, who is a part of our policy team, who helped draft this matrix, and they'll be able to explain the details of the document and what it means and how you and the community can help us. If you need any Spanish interpretation, you can either indicate that in the chat or raise your hand, and we do have a Spanish interpreter on standby that can help.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. All righty, let me get this opened up for us here. So today we're going to be talking about the disciplinary matrix. This is a proposal for change that the policy division has offered. And to get us started off, I'm actually going to hand it off to AJ.
Hi, everyone. My name's AJ. I'm an attorney with the PAB. And I just want to go over some of the stuff we'll be discussing tonight. So first for our agenda is what is a disciplinary matrix? We'll also be discussing RPD's current disciplinary matrix and the RPD's discipline history. And then we'll be discussing the PAB's proposed matrix features and getting some input and feedback from you about various aspects of our proposal. So we're very interested in your feedback and your perspective on what you think the disciplinary matrix should look like. Okay. So first, to address what is a disciplinary matrix? Well, first and foremost, it's a guideline or a rubric for discipline. And so what it does is it creates progressive standards of discipline that would apply to different sorts of misconduct that can be committed. And it's progressive because the discipline or the sanctions go up as the severity of the misconduct increases or as the number of instances of misconduct increases. Currently, the disciplinary matrix will bind the recommendations that PAB makes with respect to discipline in the event that PAB sustains a complaint of misconduct. Originally, the law was also going to bind RPD, but that part of the law, the disciplinary power of the PAB, is currently on hold due to some legal decisions. So currently, the matrix will only be a recommendation to RPD with respect to discipline. That legal decision is currently on appeal, so it's possible that could change in the future. But for now, the matrix will bind the Police Accountability Board's disciplinary recommendations. But as I said, there will only be recommendations for RPD. And another question we want to address is why we even want a disciplinary matrix, or what's the point of it? And we think it's important because it's a way for the community to express its values or what it wants to see with respect to discipline for misconduct in Rochester for RPD. It can express those values. If we think discipline needs to be more severe, the matrix can reflect that, in particular for issues that the community cares about. Further, it creates a transparent disciplinary system in which any member of the public would be able to see what sort of discipline would be at stake for different sorts of misconduct that may occur. And it's not only transparent for the public, it's transparent for a reporter who might be reporting an issue of misconduct, and it's transparent for the officer who may be accused of misconduct. They're not going to be surprised about what sort of discipline they might be facing. Additionally, the matrix can be altered depending on the feedback that we get. So we're interested in feedback from the community to see what sort of issues are you thinking about and how should we change our proposal based on your feedback. And lastly, of course, it's legally required. So the city charter, which enables the Police Accountability Board to exist, requires us to establish a disciplinary matrix prior to the board hearing any cases of misconduct. So this is an essential function of the PAB, is to create this discipline system prior to hearing any cases. So that's why we have it. Now, we're also currently going through this public process. And so we first developed a draft. Now we're engaging in community events to help get feedback on different aspects of the matrix. And we'll be also soliciting feedback from affected communities, from the Locust Club or the police union. And ultimately, based on all the feedback we receive, we'll be developing a final draft, which will go to to vote for the whole board will get an opportunity to vote on it. And then once it's finalized, we'll send it over to RPD. And now I will turn it back over to Jonathan, who will tell you about RPD's current matrix.
All righty. Now, before we get into this, I just want to go ahead and pause and check in with Rena, make sure there are no questions coming in so far that we need to address.
We don't have any questions in the chat yet.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Jonathan Corey. I am a policy and data analyst at the PAB. I want to talk just a little bit about with you all the current RPD matrix. So what is currently effective when it comes to officer discipline and misconduct here in Rochester. So this disciplinary matrix is negotiated in the collective bargaining agreement. That is the police union contract that the Locust Club negotiates with the city of Rochester. This was last negotiated and agreed upon for 2016 to 2019 and is currently still in effect while it is being renegotiated at this time. So let's just go down the columns first, rather the rows, excuse me. In the rows, you'll notice that there are different classes, class 1, 2, and 3, right? There are no class definitions provided, so misconducts are ranked from class 1, 2, and 3. However, there is not a definition that we can find for these classes to be able to discern them from one another or understand why one misconduct may be categorized in a class 1 versus a class 2. As we go across the columns, we encounter the number of incidents. So that's first, second, and third incident. And I'm realizing now that this might also be shared. So there we go. So again, this is the progressive element of that matrix, right? Something else to bear in mind is the sanctions that are described within the matrix. So these suspensions that we find right here in the middle of it, these are all maximum possible penalties to be assigned. So for example, if I commit a class 2 misconduct for the second time, then a maximum of 30-day suspension can be provided as a sanction or as discipline for that misconduct. So this is the current, again, operating matrix for officers here in Rochester. So I think a very natural question to ask based on this is, what are the most common misconducts that we see happening here in Rochester? So we take a look at a data set that's available to us, available to everybody actually. The repeal of 50A provided us access to sustained misconduct files for current RPD officers. So these misconduct files can be found if you just go to Google and Google RPD misconduct files or sustained disciplinary files. You will find a database that has been created by RPD that is through SharePoint that contains all of those files, 167 total files between 111 total officers. So we took a look at those and we found through them the most frequently committed misconduct. So what we're looking at in front of us, these 6 comprise 75% of all of the misconducts in this file. So the rest of the 25% that exist occur in less than 3% frequency. So for the purpose of this presentation, they will not be addressed. And we're just going to go through these one by one. The first most common misconduct we see is department property and equipment violations, which is a class 1. I'd like to go ahead and describe. The name is, obviously located right here for whatever the misconduct is. And what we see in asterisks right here is the rank under the current disciplinary matrix. So again, department property and equipment being the most frequently committed misconduct has a class 1 ranking. Obedience to orders and obedience to law, which occur in nearly the same frequency, both have a class 3 ranking. Conduct and courtesy, which both also have a similar frequency coming in at about 8%, have a class 2 ranking, and altering, delaying, or falsifying reports coming in at about 4% has a rank 3, class 3. So some things to get in just about these misconducts, where they can be found. These misconducts are listed and ranked in RPD's rules and regulations. And that's exactly where these come from. Obedience to orders is, I think, 1.2 and comprises essentially is a misconduct that is a catch-all category for any violation of any of the general orders that exist for RPD. They have several general orders that they follow. There's an index separated between chapters 1 through 6. And we'll talk a little bit more about those general orders and how the directives of those general orders have been considered for this disciplinary matrix, as well as the rules and regulations, which were previously ranked. So we know now the most frequently occurring misconducts. What kind of sanctions or discipline are assigned or given for those misconducts? So here we have a table that outlines the frequency of sanctions assigned to particular misconducts, the ones that we went over earlier. So just to provide a little bit of context for how this table works, let's go ahead and look at these rows over here, these classifications. In the event that a suspension resulted in less than 20 days, that is considered, based on the RPD disciplinary matrix, a class 1 sanction. If the suspension is between 20 and 60 days, that is considered a class 2 sanction. And if the suspension is greater than 60 days, that's considered a class 3 sanction. So going one by one, we can start over here on the left with department property and equipment. We see that's a class 1 violation. And we see 100% of the time it receives a class 1 sanction, right? So moving on to obedience to orders, we see that as a class 3 sanction. However, only 4% of the time is a class 3 sanction or penalty assigned for that misconduct. In fact, 78% of the time, a class 1 penalty is assigned, meaning a suspension less than 20 days, and 20% of the time, a class 2 misconduct, or a sanction, is assigned. We see a really similar trend for obedience to laws, which is also a class 3 misconduct, and also results in nearly less than 5% accuracy of sanctions for class 3 being provided. Really, the 75% or the majority of the sanctions being spread or distributed between class 1 and class 2 for a class 3 misconduct. Conduct over here on the just right of obedience to laws, we see a similar trend. It is a class 2 misconduct. However, it is only penalized within the scope of a class 2 30% of the time. Courtesy, which is a class 2 misconduct, is penalized within a scope 2 0% of the time. And altering or delaying or falsifying reports, which is a class 3 misconduct, is also penalized, consistent with a class 3 violation 0% of the time. So again, this is just taking the results of these sustained misconducts files and ranking them based on where they fall in their respective class. So when we do that, we notice some trends, right? So the question is, what are the trends? What are we seeing here? We're seeing, one, a lot of discretion. We're seeing a lot of discretion occurring. We're seeing punitive sanctions are really the only sanctions we see being assigned other than written reprimands or counselings and trainings. And another issue that we've identified a trend is there's really no public explanation. So whenever a discipline, a suspension amount, or any discipline is decided upon by the chief of police for an officer's misconduct, the chief is not required to disclose their reason behind that assigned sanction. And often we find it is inconsistent across like sanctions. So what we think should be different. Sorry, just checking the chat to make sure there were no questions in there. What we think should be different. We have some proposed features. To deal with unlimited discretion, we propose a written explanation by the board and the chief. So the board, upon reviewing the case, and the chief upon deciding which discipline will be assigned in the event that there is a sustained investigation, there's a written explanation required by both parties to explain why they selected the outcome that they selected. Another issue that we identified again is that there seem to be only punitive sanctions in this discipline, or in the current acting disciplinary matrix, meaning the outcomes are either going to be a written reprimand, a suspension, or a termination. We provide some alternate outcomes and a potential optional restorative process. And the reason for doing so is we do not believe that punitive sanctions are enough for behavioral modification. Currently, there exists a 33% recidivism rate for officer misconduct. That means of the officers that have committed misconduct and have sustained misconducts in their files, 33% of them have more than one sustained misconduct. So if punitive sanctions were an effective means of behavioral modification, we believe that number wouldn't be as large as it is. So offering alternate outcomes and a potential restorative process, which we'll get more into later. And for, it's so sorry, it seems like these are swapped. For unlimited discretion, right, we have now ranked all of the violations and behavioral directives. So this includes general orders. Currently, the only ranked behavioral directives for RPD are the rules and regulations. There are several general orders that they abide by. In fact, some of the most frequently violated general orders, I would say, are of notice. So there is 337, or use of force, 335, which is a subject resistance report, 435, juvenile reports, 585, which are arrests. All of these general orders, all of the directives within those general orders have been individually ranked. There are presumptive outcomes instead of maximum outcomes. So when I say that, recall previously in the disciplinary matrix, in fact, let me just go to it. All of the possible outcomes were maximums. For example, this is a maximum possible outcome. So long as the outcome is less than 3 days suspension, it is consistent, right? So in order to make things a little less confusing in that way, our matrix has presumptive outcomes, meaning instead, you would take a look, and this would be a class 1 violation first incident, you would presumably receive 3 days suspension. That outcome of 3 days suspension, that presumptive outcome, can be aggravated or mitigated. So it can be hiked up, or we can pull it down a little bit. And that all depends on the unique circumstances of that misconduct, right? And again, those are things that would need to be written, and there would have to be provided explanation by the board and chief upon aggravating or mitigating any sanctions from their presumptive outcome. So can we see some pictures of it? This is the current disciplinary matrix. We are going to go through this just bit by bit. This is a lot to consume right off the bat, but some things that I will say just before we start, right? There are just things to keep in mind, more levels to consider in this disciplinary matrix. So instead of levels 1 through 3, we have levels 1 through 5. We have class descriptions of those levels to be able to provide context We have, as well as the previous, a progressive model of discipline. So we'll start going through these bits one by one. I'll provide some examples of each of these misconducts, and we can just get a little bit of a better feel for it. Okay, so this is, again, just the descriptions. We're going to read through these together one by one. So outcome category 1, this is a level 1. I may also say the intention of how these increase with level is with increased harm either committed to community or to other agencies or other departments and things of that nature. So with the increased amount of harm corresponds directly with the increased level. So for level 1, we have a description of a minimal negative impact on the community or department image or operations with no impact on relationships with other agencies. A presumptive outcome. So again, this is the outcome that you would expect if you committed a level 1 misconduct. Some examples for that are Rule 2.10, leaving your area of assignment without permission, or employees loitering or sleeping on duty. General Order 220, Section A7, a failure to submit your overtime report immediately. Anything that directly impacts the internal operations of RPD without having a necessarily bad impact on community or anyone external would be considered level 1. So in the event that, rather, I'll get to those here in a little bit. So that's our level 1. Level 2, the description for this is now a more than minimal negative impact on the community or department image or operations, relationships with other officers and agencies. The outcome for this is a presumptive 5-day suspension. Some examples for this are Rule 3.2, using on-duty time in pursuit of private business, or 3.11, using officer resources in pursuit of private or civil business. So that's resources within the office, maybe it's databases, information. And just to, pause here real quick, some feedback that we've already gotten on some of the language of these descriptions that I would like to offer is some folks have mentioned that department image does not need to be a consideration, and that this should exclusively focus on harm to community. So we are really interested in your thoughts, everyone's thoughts on the language of these descriptions and how we can really codify that language to capture the increasing harm. So any recommendations you have on that are great. Yeah. So moving on to the third outcome category, we have a description of a pronounced negative impact on the community or department image or operations or relationships with other officers or agencies, resulting in a presumptive 10-day suspension. Some examples for this are Rule 2.2, failure to furnish your name and badge to any person requesting. Failure 2.13, failure to render all possible police services to any citizen seeking information, or 3.6, accepting rewards for service. So these are misconducts that we believe when committed, we really start to bleed into this impact to community, whether it causes a direct harm to the person on account of that specific misconduct, or whether it creates a general feeling of perhaps distrust for the agency. Those are things where we really start to focus on level 3 and beyond. So for a level 4 misconduct, significantly impacting the community or department image, resulting in a presumptive outcome of 60-day suspension. Some examples for this: failure to ensure that any injured or ill person is given an opportunity for medical attention, being intoxicated on duty, failure to announce your presence and purpose upon entry. Again, something I just want to point out here is that the examples of the directives here are no longer exclusive to just rules and regulations, but are also considering the general orders that have very specific directives within them. And again, all of those general orders have been ranked and are accessible and visible through our website. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So outcome category 5, criminal misdemeanors, felonies, severe misconducts have major negative impact or are otherwise demonstrating a serious lack of integrity, ethics, or character, include conduct that could effectively disqualify an officer from employment. Outcome that we suggest for this, presumably, would be a termination. Some examples: General Order 335, a failure to only use the appropriate amount of force. General Order 336, failure to intervene or stop any members from using excessive force. General Order 415, conducting a strip or visual body cavity inspection upon a stop and frisk. So this is where we're really starting to get into, again, criminal misconducts. We are getting into Fourth Amendment violations. We are getting into some of those really grave concerns. So thoughts on, just before moving on to progressive discipline, I'll check in and see if we have any questions coming in through the chat.
None yet?
Great. So something I will say, I've mentioned quite a bit, about the difference between rules and regulations versus the general orders, how they are currently all ranked. If you were to visit our website, which I really encourage you to visit our website, that is where you can leave feedback. In fact, I'll step through that process here just at the very end of what that looks like. And I'll show you some of the documents that I'm referring to, but you can also find all of these general orders and rules and regulations ranked in a file called the appendix that is available on our website. So that will give you a good idea of how these things have been ranked, something for you to go through and provide comment on, hopefully. So the next element of this is the progressive element of discipline, right? We increase the severity of the outcome based on the increasing levels, but we also increase the severity of outcome based on the number of prior sustained violations. So some thoughts on this. How does it progress? Do you feel like it progresses rapidly enough? Do we feel that written reprimand and counseling and training is appropriate for the 0th and first time you have sustained a level 1 violation? Do we feel it's only appropriate until you've had your first sustained violation? What about the level 4? Do we feel we need more options beyond a 60-day suspension and a termination? Do we think we need less options? Do we only need a termination? Do we only need 60 days? Do we need less than 60, right? Anything that you can consider on the progression of this, how you feel it progresses, whether you think it progresses well or whether you think it does not progress well, and you have a specific recommendation on how it could progress better. We're really interested in that information. And the last thing that we will talk about today are alternate outcomes. And I'm going to do a little bit of discussion on here, and then I'll actually pass it over to AJ to provide some additional thoughts and comments. Standard outcomes, again, that are included in the current RPD matrix are trainings, counselings, written reprimands, suspensions, and terminations. Alternate outcomes that we have seen through several disciplinary matrices just throughout the nation. We've done an analysis on those that exist. Remuneration to victim or to the community are things that we have seen come up. An optional restorative process. That restorative process would need consent from both parties, both the officer and the community member that is alleging misconduct, and would only occur in the event that both parties agree to it. A public service is a possibility, apology, fine, driver's training, transfers, employee assistance, and demotion. And there are some elements of this that I'm going to pass on to AJ to discuss for us.
Yeah, I just, want to mention that these are just examples of things we've seen in other disciplinary systems across the country. There might be some legal challenges to instituting some of these things in Rochester. Just to take one example, fines might be prevented by rules related to qualified immunity, which prevents officers from being held personally liable for damage or harm that they have caused in some situations. So just be aware, we're not necessarily saying we could do all of these right now, but it is, as Jonathan mentioned, worth thinking about what alternatives might there be, if any, that you want, and we're interested in hearing your thoughts about what you might want, if anything, in addition to punitive sanctions.
Thanks, AJ. And something else that I think is worth thinking about, specifically as in regards to the restorative process, how could some of these alternate outcomes, if any of these alternate outcomes could be used as mitigating or aggravating circumstances? So in the event that an officer agrees to a restorative process, I think it's important that we disclose, the restorative process would happen in tandem or parallel with the investigatory process. It would not happen in lieu of that investigatory process. So does, willingness to engage in a restorative process show good faith? Does that, something we should consider as a mitigating factor? Anything on mitigating and aggravating factors that the public has to offer as well. Insight to that would be very valuable to us. So I will let all of that marinate and perhaps let some questions start to trickle in. And in the meantime, I'll open up our website and kind of show everybody how we can provide input, where we can find these documents, if we're at home and wanting to do that. Okay. All right.
I was just letting you know, nothing has come in through the chat at this time. Vanessa, did you have anything on your end?
Nothing on my end. No.
Fantastic. Awesome. All right. So our website, rockpab.org, right? You can put it in your browser directly. You can Google Rochester Police Accountability Board. You can Bing Rochester Police Accountability Board. Those search engines are all going to work. So this is our website, right? In order to file a report, you can do that right here. But if you go just below that, you'll be able to see the policy and oversight work. The two proposals for change that we have out, both in English and in Spanish. So right now we are talking about the disciplinary matrix. I would love to encourage all of you in your time to go check out the data transparency proposal for change. While I am not responsible for the work on this, my colleague Sarah Jenks is and has done a tremendous job. And we would also love your feedback on that proposal for change as well. But the disciplinary matrix input is right here. So the full disciplinary matrix can be found here. If you click on this, you can see our methodology for creating it. It runs through some of the data analytics it's a much smaller scope of the data analytics that I provided today, discusses the public comment period, and goes through each of the sections of the disciplinary matrix for you to understand, provides you a copy of the matrix as well at the end. So that is there for you. And the appendix, which is located right here off to the left, is where all of the rules and regulations have been categorized, as well as the general orders. So this is a very lengthy document that separates all of RPD's general orders into individual directives and ranks them accordingly. So those are the two documents that we have available for public comment. We are very interested in your thoughts on those things. And again, anything that you think should be different, the way that you can do that and provide that comment is right here. So scrolling down past those documents, you can read a little bit here about why, right, just some things that we discussed today. And this is the public comment form that we have. So yeah, things that you would like to see different about the matrix, specific things that perhaps you would like to see removed from the matrix. If there are things that you would like to see included, perhaps that's something you could mention in the first question, and then your zip code. Yeah, we appreciate your feedback. And again, this is a process that you can also go through for the data transparency proposal for change, the full report being right here as well. Some really spectacular work here, and the comments that you can provide just down below. in the event that you are watching this and you would like your organization to receive a similar presentation, maybe through an online, interactive, more of a dialogue-based meeting, then we're happy to do that. You can email us again at I'm sorry, Vanessa, could you provide that email again? I'm not going to pretend like I remember.
It's all right. Yes, so I guess as we're closing this out, for anybody who is watching this, you can provide any feedback to PAB feedback@cityofrochester.gov.
Rena, do you have your hand up?
Yes, we do have two commenters in the chat. One says, between the nth and first time class 4 penalties should be a 1-year suspension, not 60 days. The disincentive has to be real. Another writes, I am a firm believer of restorative practices, but I'm not sure what that would look like among police officers, especially when we do not have access to all levels of accountability like termination.
It's wonderful feedback. Yeah. So for those that are either saw that, do I still have y'all?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry, my screen just went off, so I'm just gonna keep moving along, even though I can't see anything, and we're just gonna for those of you listening to those comments, those are very much the kind of comments we're interested in. So your thoughts on a restorative process, or your thoughts on the specific sanctions, both the nitty-gritty detail and the high-level thoughts and considerations. Yeah, thank you.
All right, Rena, if those are the only questions or comments that we have, and again, to the people watching, thank you so much for your input. If you have any other feedback, please provide it either in the chat or at pabfeedback@cityofrochester.gov. And Jonathan and AJ, as long as you have no other parts of the presentation, I think we can wrap this up, and the video will be hosted on our social pages if anybody would like to go back and watch and maybe leave any comments as well on there. But if you guys are all set, I think we can wrap it up.
Thank you.
I'm all
everyone.
set. Yeah, thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you again for anybody watching at home for your participation and just giving us the opportunity to present this work. Our policy team has been hard at work putting this out. And the next phase of this, the most important phase, is getting your input, the public's input on these documents. And so we encourage you to like, comment, and share on our socials to anybody you also might think is interested in getting this information and that would be interested in providing their input. The comment period does end on December 2nd. And so we are looking to get as much feedback as possible until that time. So thank you so much from the PAB, and everybody have a good night.